75,000 years ago, the Earth experienced a devastating climatic event. A massive volcanic eruption in Sumatra threw millions of tons of ash and sulfurous gases high into the atmosphere, plunging the Earth into a downward icy spiral. For many thousands of years, temperatures dropped relentlessly. The ice cap spread out from the poles, causing sea levels to fall by 150 meters. Glaciers stretched down from the mountaintops into the valleys. There was ice half a mile deep, as far south as London and Brussels. South of the ice, sheltered mountain areas had remarkable microclimates with thick vegetation and great plant diversity. There were herds of reindeer and ibex, and woolly mammoth roamed the Russian steppes. This is the land of the Neanderthals. These valleys, these steep slopes and ridges and woods have scarcely changed since small bands of Neanderthals hunted and foraged and took shelter here. The Neanderthals present one of the world's oldest unsolved problems because of the suddenness of their disappearance. We know that both men and women were immensely strong, with big bones and heavy muscles. Their brains were larger than modern people's. With only skins to keep them warm and a few stone tools, they'd learned how to stay alive in the longest, bleakest winter the world has ever known. They had the hunting skills to kill the giant mammoth. It's possible they even had language. But life was brutal and short. Every Neanderthal found has broken and scarred bones. Life was over by 40.
Neanderthals were living over a wide area of Europe and the Middle East, as far as Western Asia, from about 250,000 years ago to about 30 or 35,000 years ago. They were almost certainly living in relatively small human groups, probably not more than about 10 or 20 people together, probably living in quite low population densities, much lower than those of later populations, living basically a hunter-gatherer lifestyle.
They had fire. They had skins, they had caves, they had stone tools, they had wooden tools, they had bone tools. They had nothing like what we're talking about now. It was a very hard place to make a living. And the reason they could do it was because they were very, very smart.
The Neanderthals would have exploited a range of resources. Small fish, perhaps, small mammals, the occasional kill, the occasional scavenging, berries, fruits, tubers, whatever they could find in the environment. And it was a good strategy because it lasted for 150,000 years. This is a species that lasted longer on Earth than we've been around. They had powerful physiques, they had large brains, they were very well adapted to withstand very harsh conditions. And they did so for 100,000 years. And yet at the end, they disappeared. Why?
That is the burning question. The Neanderthals were the great survivors. They first appeared in Europe around 150,000 years ago. As the Ice Age tightened its grip, they spread across Europe. Then, mysteriously, around 30,000 years ago, they disappeared from the fossil record. Just a brief flash of time before the beginnings of recorded history, around 10,000 years ago, with the first signs of agriculture and settlements. The simmering debate about what happened to the Neanderthals has recently turned into open warfare at seminars and scientific gatherings between two rival theories. Were the Neanderthals pushed into extinction by the appearance of a new species, or are they still with us, merged into modern populations?
This is a battle that continues. We have to understand that we're dealing with our history. This is the family secret we're looking at and trying to divulge to the world as best we can. There's no way to take the emotion out of it.
There's a great deal of research that's being conducted that's slow and painstaking and is putting together the pieces of an extremely complicated puzzle.
It's a quest that's been going on ever since the Indiana Jones era of archaeology.
The fate of the Neanderthals has been debated among prehistorians and physical anthropologists since the beginning of this discipline, sometime in the 19th century.
fossils are very rare. Fossils of any particular species in the past are always very rare, and human ancestors, not having been terribly numerous when they were alive, are in short supply. We don't have a lot of hard evidence, even though we've had 150 years of collecting.
Archaeologists are always short of bones. They found only 30 or so fossilized Neanderthal skeletons, all incomplete. The most complete, but with the skull and one limb missing, was found in Israel in 1982. It's been nicknamed Moisha. From this tiny haul, they've sought to create a complete dossier of Neanderthal existence. Inevitably, it's a mixture of science and conjecture, and it has led to huge controversy. The earliest anthropologists introduced a prejudice against Neanderthals, and that continues to have repercussions even today.
The Neanderthals have had a bad rap from the beginning. They got off to a poor start. When the first really complete Neanderthal skeleton was found in 1908, it was given over to study by a fellow named Marcellin Boule in France. Marcellin Boule hated Neanderthals. He didn't want to have anything to do with the idea that this very primitive-looking creature could have been the ancestors of modern Europeans and the modern Frenchmen. So he painted a portrait of Neanderthal that has really survived in our popular literature to the present day. The idea of this sort of stooped, slumped, bent at the knee, kind of lumbering brute with the big brow that really doesn't know where he's going.
This caricature of Neanderthals has stuck. After all, we call someone a Neanderthal in common parlance. It's the only name of a fossil human that has come into everyday language. We don't refer to somebody as a stupid Australopithecine. Most people wouldn't know what you were talking about, but you can call someone a Neanderthal, and everybody knows what you mean. It's the archetypal caveman. It's the guy with hair on his face and big brow ridges who goes ugh and carries a club. And it's become a symbol of stupidity, of savagery.
That is the scientific view of the Neanderthal in this turn-of-the-century drawing. More ape than man, as hairy almost as a gorilla. Though this view of the Neanderthals remains the common perception, since the 1960s among scientists, there's been a massive re-evaluation. Modern forensic techniques have pinned down more accurate details of Neanderthal appearance. Powerful jaws and teeth for chewing, which made their chins disappear. Large projecting noses to warm the icy Arctic air. Sloping foreheads and heavy reinforcing brow ridges. But Neanderthals could certainly walk upright and looked more human than ape. The 60s re-evaluation brought Neanderthals into the human family, our immediate ancestors in Europe. Now, in this representation, the hairiness is gone, not a beard in sight. Neanderthals are seen together in a cozy family group. The fact is, no one really knows. Was all this humanizing simply a projection of contemporary values?
Neanderthal behavior toward other Neanderthals was socially and individually very complex. One good example we have this is an old male Neanderthal found in Iraq. This guy was crippled, he had his arm amputated, he was beaten up, there's certainly a very large blow that went to the side of his head, and he was probably blinded in one eye. There's a lot of scar tissue along here. His foot was crippled, he limped, and he lived to one of the oldest ages we know of for a Neanderthal, about 45 or 50. That's an interesting juxtaposition of things. There were others who helped keep him alive. Now, we don't know why. Did they like him? Did he contribute something valuable to their society? Were these his kids, and they were simply protecting their own genes? Yeah, we could spin a lot of yarns about why this happened, but the point is they're all human yarns. They're not animal yarns, and it tells us that the depth of their behavior was a social depth. We know that they could make structures. We know that they understood how fire worked and made hearths, circles of stone to surround fire, to keep fire contained, and to keep a cave heated long after the fire went out. There's no behavioral capacity that we could think of for modern humanity that Neanderthals lacked.
Archaeologist John Shea has spent many years using the flint on the Long Island shoreline to research Neanderthal tool-making skills.
Many of my colleagues accuse me of being a member of the Neanderthal Anti-Defamation Society. I think in some ways we look at the wrong things about Neanderthals. We're so intent upon explaining why they became extinct that we overlook the many ways in which they were successful. What I'm doing is I'm creating a convexity. I need to set up a striking platform along this edge so that when the flake comes up, it'll cut out underneath the rock and come out underneath these scars here. See, all the planning that's going into this, I'm thinking all the time. I'm not just banging one flake after another. I have to sort of think strategically. It's exactly the opposite of the traditional way of thinking of Neanderthals as these sort of lumbering, shambling dummies who, ran around bumping into trees. Take a piece of grinding stone to prepare the surface so that when you strike it with a hammerstone, the edge doesn't fail and the fracture doesn't form until there's a huge amount of force bearing on that edge. There you go. I'm happy with that one. Big broad flake, razor sharp edge with the sharpest cutting edge known to man, sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. Sharp enough to shave with, although, I don't seem to have done it lately. This is the kind of tool that Neanderthals carried around with them from site to site. We find bits and pieces of these hand axes chipped at sites. These things are fantastically sharp. Watch this trick. Okay, and you're done. It's a job that takes seconds, or measured in minutes, not hours. This isn't a kosher butchery, mind you, but these tools are made to work fast, they're made to work well, and they're made to withstand a lot of hard work. They're made to be pounded with and used with tremendous amounts of force. There's no evidence of stupidity or brutishness there. They emerge as very clever, very facultative tool users. Every bit as clever as you or I might be faced with similar kinds of challenges.
But in the scientific community over the past 10 years, the pendulum has begun to swing the other way. Many now feel the 60s were far too generous to the Neanderthals. They may have had fire, for example, but their use of it was pretty basic, little more than campfires. They seem to have been scavengers and foragers as much as hunters. Some believe they hadn't yet evolved a recognizable family structure.
The picture that I get from having worried over the archaeological record is not a picture of a very tight and bonded family life. It's a picture of males cooperating with males, spending much of their time with males, certainly visiting locations where females and children are, sometimes presumably bringing great gifts of meaty parts.
Lewis Binford has put forward this hypothesis that Neanderthal males and females lived very separate lives, and that the men basically went out, hunted, came back occasionally, got the women pregnant, and went off again. It's an interesting idea. I don't know how you would prove it was true or not. If you have different kinds of toolkits, for example, and you say this is the women's and this is the men's, they're separate, they indicate division of labor along lines of sex. My question is, how do you know that? How do you know one of them is women's? How do you know one of them is men's? It may be the eyes of the beholder that is seeing this as a separation along lines of sex.
That is a typical post-60s debate. But the picture that emerges of Neanderthals is of a big, strong, muscular species, a great survivor in a tough environment, but slow to change. Their tools remained the same for thousands and thousands of years. There was little sign of evolution in technology or behavior. That is, until a newcomer appeared on the scene.
For some 200,000 years, before this point, people have been doing the same thing over and over and over, banging out the same kinds of tools, using the same technical methods of getting those tools out of a piece of rock. It was a period which one archaeologist has described as a period of unimaginable monotony. And then suddenly, and it is quite sudden, instead of sameness, you have difference, you have variation. And not only do you have the tools, but you have this flowering of this first burst of artistic and symbolic activity happening at the same time. It's an enormously important event. It's probably the most important event in human culture.